Disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Scythe Tleppo, Chapter 9. A child's first teacher is its mother, Peng Liuwan. I woke up to the smell of campfire smoke and cold air. There were people outside the cabin. I knew who they were. Unwanted children like me. I rose to my feet slowly and went out to the cabin door, past a wood stove used for heat and light within the cabin. Outside, I found dirty kids gathered around a campfire, staring blankly into the flames. A tin can rumbled as the water inside came to a boil. The security guard on watch was a big man, connected via his military radio. Imagine they're guarding children with military CBs. To an unknown number of other security forces. Campfire smoke wafted around the cabin and whispered a chilling message. You're never leaving here, not this time. I knew I was in serious trouble and no one was going to help me. I was alone. Ross was the only security guard at the cabin. The other kids there looked like they had been through the ringer. Dirty faces, tattered clothes, the look of general malaise. There were a couple of girls and a few boys scattered around. Waking up in this place was normal for them. I could see that. A boy my age handed me a loaf of bread. Here, eat this, he said. He gave me the look I knew already. We're in this together. I knew these kids were like me. Their families left them here to rot. I was going out at night and hanging out with kids from the last ranch. Is that enough to send me back here, Mom? Paul said Wally wasn't here anymore. But Paul, his nephew. Does Wally come around often? God help me. The top few slices of bread were covered with aqua green mold. I tried to pass the bread back to Johnny, but he had already turned away. There was no point in eating the bread yet. I knew I would be eating it soon enough. Our toilet was a hole in the dirt. The kids built a makeshift outhouse around it to offer some privacy, which had long since been covered in graffiti. Names of kids who had served their time, crude drawings and passages of wisdom about marijuana and sex littered the walls. I was surprised at how small the ranch had become. There were maybe 25 people at the Palmdale Ranch. Here there were only a few kids. Maybe these are the final days for the ranch. Everyone mostly avoided me, which was just fine. Ross's shift expired, and Mike Shower, another enormous security guard from Palmdale, replaced him. The next day was a haze like the first. I wondered how I could go home. I needed to call my mother. The following day, I asked Mike to call her. The ranch had a policy that new kids couldn't contact their parents for 2 weeks, so they could de-stimulate, calm down first. A fact I discovered much later. Mike must have forgotten about this because he let me call my mom after 2 days. Mike and I loaded up in a dirty black van and drove out of camp. I was already annoyed just thinking about how I still didn't have my stuff. Where the damn hell is my stuff? I had already been wearing the same clothes for days without showering. Maybe my stuff is already down wherever the phones are. The van was filthy and run down. I felt filthy and run down too. We took a dirt road on a rocky and dusty mountain with many winding curves. We drove up a hill so steep, I thought we might roll over. After 10 minutes, we arrived at a large wooden fenced area with several small buildings. I saw large double-wide trailers with custom-built wooden walkways and steps. There was a chicken coop, a main house, an enormous woodshed, and vehicles all around. We stopped in front of the last building, a trailer raised off the ground with wooden decks around it. Inside, there were desks on cheap carpet. Lafayette's books were on the shelves, his posters on the walls. A kid around my age at the front desk, with military fatigues on. He said something to me about my shirt, but I wasn't interested. I wasn't trying to be popular. I was trying to get my stuff or get the hell out. Mike dialed my mother's number, which he found in a Rolodex. He told her I wanted to talk to her and handed me the phone. And then he started talking to the kid who was working there. I was already upset with my mother, but I tried to hide it the best I could. I didn't do a very good job. Where's my stuff, Mom? When can I go home? How long do I have to stay here? Are you really sending me back here? She told me I needed to stay until I finished the program. What is that? Actually, I don't even care what it is. I already knew it was some Scientology crap I wasn't interested in doing. She told me she didn't want to send me my stuff, but didn't give me a reason. She just didn't want to send it. I blew up. I don't care what you want. Just send me my damn stuff. It's mine. They said you were going to send it to me. She calmed and said, "Okay, Nathan, I'll send it." Let me talk to the staff member there. Finally. I turned around to see Mike had perked up from my outburst and was standing by to grab the phone in case there was more trouble. Instead, I handed him the phone and he got on. He said, "Yes, okay, I understand. Okay, will do. Okay, bye." He hung up the phone, turned to me and said, "Okay, let's head back to camp." I didn't ask him what she said, because I assumed she had asked him to send her the mailing address or something. We walked back out and got back in the dirty van, back to what the staff referred to as the camp. Over the next week, I learned much more about my situation. What I originally believed was very different than the reality. The ranch hadn't shrunk, it had grown. The cabin I stayed at wasn't the main area of the ranch. Where I made my phone call was the main part called the lower ranch. We were at a small area inside the ranch property, called simply camp. The upper ranch was where the girls lived, which was near to camp. The lower ranch was where the boys and most of the staff lived, and where the girls came down to each day during the week. I still didn't have access to those places. I was trapped at camp with the other kids. Pat was a tall kid, average in most ways. I could think of Ryan Dixon, was a short kid from the Northeast. Johnny was a punk rocker from Albuquerque. Kane was a tall, aloof, blonde-haired kid. He was there for molesting his niece. For molesting his niece. The names went on, but the stories were all the same. No one wanted these kids. On their radios, the security guards referred to me by the ranch name, November Romeo, for my real name's initials. The first time I heard it, I thought November reminded me of the closeness to winter, closeness to darkness, and Romeo must have been good looks. A couple of days after my call with my mother, I asked a kid for a cigarette. Ross said, "You have to have smoking permission for that. Did you get smoking permission from your parents?" Is he nuts? Permission? No, I didn't get permission for anything from my mother. Yeah, I got permission. He didn't look convinced. What? I did get permission. Ask Mike. He let me smoke, and I was never hassled about smoking permission again. After a couple of weeks had passed, I still hadn't received my stuff. I hadn't received any stuff. I was still wearing the same clothes as when I came. I had a borrowed sleeping bag with holes in it, and dirt covering half the shell, that's all. Child neglect anyone? When I asked to call my mother again, I got a big surprise. Turned out I was wrong about my mother asking Mike for the shipping address. Her calmness on the phone that day wasn't serenity. It was coldness. Pure icy winter. After I handed the phone to Mike, she instructed him to forbid me from calling her until I graduated. No letters, no calls, no communication, not for any reason. Now do you guys see why I say the things I say? The ranch respected her wishes. I was forbidden to contact her or anyone else in my family in any way. That week, a few of us kids were sitting together talking about what we would do if we could get out. Somehow Ryan had smuggled some Lipton tea bags from the lower ranch, which we took turns smoking. We rolled the tea into cigarettes and smoked them because tea tastes a bit like weed. No one knew I hadn't smoked weed before, and I wasn't going to be the nerd of the group, on top of everything else. I tried my best to act cool. Some of the kids had heard there was a fork in the dirt road that if followed long enough led to Mexico. Turned out that I wasn't in Canada or Mexico at all. I was in New Mexico, which apparently was a state in America. We got the idea that if we stole one of the trucks security used to come to camp, we could get to Mexico. Pat said he could drive and Ryan could go with him to hotwire the truck. He said he knew how. We weren't sure if he was telling the truth or propping himself up, but the trucks were old and worn, and the ignition wires hung down. Maybe he really can do it. Hell, I bet I could figure it out, and I don't even know how to drive. All we needed was a distraction, some way to occupy security while we did it. It had to be all of security. We had to distract all of them so they couldn't chase us down. I knew exactly what to do. We had fire. We could start a forest fire. Kanan figured out that if you take the empty milk cartons we used for water, empty them out, dry them up, and lit the bottom corner with a lighter, they would slowly drip burning plastic. It was like a fuse. All we needed then were some pine needles to ignite. These were real trees, though, not the wimpy Christmas trees I'd seen in other people's homes. A pile of pine needles wasn't going to do anything to them. We didn't have much to work with. Johnny knew another trick. We just had to get a hold of some gasoline. I learned a lot about starting fires, the taste of weed, hot wiring trucks, and sharp emotional pain in those first 2 weeks at camp. Another thing I learned was that if we packed styrofoam into gasoline, it would dissolve, forming a thick white sludge, and that sludge is highly effective. Napalm, it's ghetto napalm, Johnny informed. We tested it out in the campfire when security was distracted. The sludge dripped fire onto anything under it and burned that too. We had everything in place. Napalm, our ignition jugs, driver, hot wire expert, and most importantly, a road to Mexico. What we didn't have was any plan about what to do in Mexico, but none of us cared. Wandering around in Mexico seemed better than the prison we were in. We waited until the time was right. It had to be daytime because at night, security kept us in the cabin. As soon as Ross wasn't looking, we eyed each other. Are we ready? Is this it? It was. Pat and Ryan walked to the long hill down to the trucks while we stood lookout. Ross didn't see them, and as soon as they got close enough to the horizon, they started running down. It's on! Kane and I ran to the spot we had scoped out, leaving trails of dust behind. Ross noticed and started after us. This was the plan. We wanted him to follow us. We had everything ready. The milk jugs were pre-placed along with piles of pine needles and sticks around several key trees. Kane carried a small white bucket of gasoline with dozens of plates, cups, and other styrofoam items dissolved in it. And we both had lighters in our hands. I had a milk jug. We frantically struck the lighters as we tried to outrun Ross, who was already yelling over the radio. This is camp. We have a rabbit. We have 2 rabbits. Lone wolf, number 1, rabbits at camp. There's no turning back now. We nearly slid into the trees laced with kindling and jugs as the napalm finally lit. We lit the milk jugs and spread the fire and plastic around to as many piles of pine needles as we could. My heart was racing. We heard the rustling and crackling of sticks behind us as Ross closed in. Let's go! Go! I shouted to Kane. We scrambled while the wood started to burn. We hoped it was enough to keep going. Our fear was that Ross the giant would just stamp it out and our dreams of freedom would be over. Except you can't easily stamp out burning plastic. And there were no hoses or fresh water. They saw to that. We ran down the hill and crossed the dirt road. We sprinted up the mountainside opposite camp and hid, Kane and me. We waited around for the sound of a truck. Our breathing was loud, but we knew it didn't matter. Soon we would be free. To our right, a fork in the road. The left side of the fork led to camp, where Pat and Ryan would come from. The right side of it led to the lower ranch, where security forces would come from. To our left was a road out. All we had to do was find the fork in that road, and we were out. Smoke billowed out of the forest in front of us. The fire worked. Now where is the damn truck? We heard yelling and commotion from the area of the fire, but we couldn't see any flames. A distant hum became a clear noise. A truck! But which side of the fork is it coming down? We strained to see it from behind the rocks. I wanted to run down to the road and jump up and down, screaming and waving, but I had to be sure. The sound grew louder. It wasn't Pat and Ryan. It was coming from the lower ranch. Security. Damn! What is taking them so long? They would have to hide as the patrol trucks and all-terrain vehicles were coming. Security turned from the right side of the fork to the left. They were scrambling like there was a fire. There was a real possibility that we were not going to get out anymore. Where are these 2 idiots with the truck? Another security vehicle arrived. We had been waiting too long. Something was wrong. Kane said, I'm going back. I'm going to turn myself in. I wasn't turning anything in. Don't tell them where I am, I said. He started down the mountain. I won't, he replied. I had no choice but to trust him. I sat there on the mountain, unsure of what to do, then got up. I wandered around in the woods looking for anything. Any kind of weapon, vehicle, a cabin with people in it, anything at all. There were trees. There were a couple of little animals. There was dirt, a lot of dirt. There just wasn't anything of use. The sun started going down, and I knew I had to go back. Nothing was here. There was no city, no town, just a forest in the middle of nowhere, with no way out. I started back, my head full of plans. I needed to figure out how to get away from this place. I needed to figure it out carefully. I had already resigned myself to surrender when the security guards found me. It was back to camp for me. This time, though, I didn't go back in with the rest of the kids. They put me in solitary confinement. Just me, a one-man tent, and a security guard. No communication with anyone about anything. Tortillas, rice, and a tent. They were pissed off. Asking them anything was risky at this point. Talking was not allowed. The others were also split into isolation and starvation. The first one to turn and write a KR on everyone else, be a snitch, got to go back to camp. For the rest of us, we waited for days and weeks. I was in hell.